Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Lauren Auer. She's a mom of two, a military wife, and believe it or not, a trauma counselor. Her practical, scientific approach to her work is interesting in and of itself, but the fact that she takes what she learns and shares it via blogs and social media to a huge audience is amazing. Especially cool to me. We need more people who care about others and have the capacity to help to ultimately have their voices amplified. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Lauren. Lauren, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. The pleasure is absolutely all mine. And I say that even without having worked at Chick-fil-A. So it's always a good day to see a new face. All right. So generally I have some kind of made up preamble where we're walking in a park and our dogs start having friendly interactions and we have a conversation or something like that. And, we are just killing time. And, we're talking and you asked me about me because you're such a kind person. And I quickly exhaust that because I am extremely boring, which is why I have to grow a mustache like this. There's something about me has to be interesting. But it's your turn to reciprocate, Lauren. So just who are you?
Who am I? That's a big question. I feel like I ask my clients that question all the time and they look at me dumbfounded, like, where do I even start? So now you're putting me in that role. But yeah. I'm a therapist. That's why I mentioned seeing clients. So I'm primarily a trauma therapist. I own my own private practice. I also, outside of work, have two little boys. They're almost 7 and 3, and they keep me very busy. My husband's deployed right now, so doing kind of like the single mom thing for a year. And yeah, I don't know. That's like the big headers about me, I would say. I live in central Illinois. It's not very exciting here, but it's a nice time of year.
I hear you. I say the same thing about where I live. It is exceptionally boring, but a good place to raise kids. So
I feel like everybody says that about where they live, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's just because I've only lived in places where people say that about, but yeah.
I don't know. I've pretty much anywhere you have like a good, safe family environment. I guess it's a good place to raise kids. But you started with therapist. So why is that the first thing? Does it feel important to say first and foremost you're a therapist, or is that generally just what we do? It's like we kind of want to say this is me.
I typically don't lead with that, to be honest. I think part of the reason I did just there was because I referenced clients before giving any context for that. So I wanted to give context to that. But honestly, I kind of joke with some of my other therapist friends. Sometimes we'll tell people we're an accountant or something, because sometimes when you tell people you're a therapist, then they're, then you hear a lot of things that sometimes you just don't have a lot of capacity to listen to at that moment. So, it just depends.
It's permission to trauma dump on you, I guess.
Yeah, sometimes I think people do take that as permission to trauma dump, which sometimes I'm okay with that. Just depends on where I'm at. So
yeah, I know people that are like MDs, and as soon as somebody says that, I got this thing with my elbow. It's like
yeah.
Or I've been in IT forever, and it's like I don't know how to fix your computer. I'm not that kind of person. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
I don't do that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. My mother-in-law's a nurse, and I'm sending her pictures of random rashes, and I have this thing. What should I take all the time? And I'm like, man, that probably sucks for you. But also I'm going to keep doing that because you give good advice.
It's family. Family's there for you to take advantage of, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Yep. Do you, I in the medical field, I could see that being a little bit more open and available, but with kind of what you do, I would think you don't necessarily want to have those conversations with all of your family members, right?
Yeah. Some people, they trauma dump, and other people are like, oh, and they quickly change the subject. Like, oh, don't psychoanalyze me. That tells me a lot too. So, it just depends.
Gotcha. Do you see that as a challenge?
Oh yeah, for sure.
How fun. Fun. Well, two boys. I've got three children now. They're all teenagers, so they are complete morons, but I love them. They're absolutely amazing. I can't even imagine having my partner kind of away for a year. What's that like?
Oh man. You know, I mean, ever since before we were even married, my husband's been in the military. So part of it is kind of like, I don't know what it's not like. When people ask me that, like, it's just kind of our norm. But, you know, it's definitely, it makes certain things more difficult, and there's a big time difference. It's definitely harder this time around. He's been deployed before, but last time we just had one child, and he was young enough to like not really know what was going on, or even he doesn't remember that at all. But now he knows. And so he's sad and he misses dad, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's hard to deal with. I think it's other people that are affected by it too. So, but
are you pretty good at compartmentalizing that stuff, keeping yourself busy so you don't overly think about it?
I think so. I mean, I'm pretty used to kind of doing things on my own, and I kind of like my me time and my space and stuff. So in some ways it works out well. And I'm okay in those environments, but yeah, you know, there's obviously a lot of hardship to it as well.
I know I moved to Memphis for a little while one time, and I went ahead of my family, and I was there for 3 months, which is, that's not very long, right? But whenever they finally caught up, it took me about a week to reacclimate. Like I was not ready to have all these other humans around me. It was loud. It was like kind of frustrating. Do you kind of have to reacclimate every time he gets to come back home?
Yeah. And definitely on his end, you know, I think the military does a pretty good job about preparing not just them, the soldiers, but also the families for that process, and like what to expect, and, you know, how to manage it and all that kind of stuff. So luckily there's a lot of good education there. And I don't know, we try to keep it pretty low key during those times when he's coming back. Like, we're not going to be doing like a ton of traveling and like, let's have a party and let's have all our friends over, because that's just a lot, you know? So, we've kind of figured out a good balance over time about that. But yeah, it is an adjustment for sure.
You got a rhythm. That's good. That's good. That's interesting that you said they give you a lot of education stuff. Is it like, here materials are available, or is it kind of like, hey, we've enrolled you to this thing, you're going to need to like pop in and, you know, make sure that you're kind of, you know, actually going through all that stuff? Because I've talked to some guys that have kind of left the military, and they've told me that it's more or less like, here's a pamphlet, you know. It's like they're not really like really kind of strongly encouraging you to, you know, look at this or look at that.
I think on his end, like with the soldiers, they're able to, like, they make them actually sit in the class and do all that kind of stuff. Now, how much they listen or take it in, I guess, is up to them, right? But so at least typically when they do come back, they go somewhere within the United States for usually about 2 weeks to do classes like that, and I don't know, other things that they need to do to get prepared and stuff. And then from there, they come back to wherever it is they live. On the family side, it's more like, here's a pamphlet, and there's things that are offered, you know, there are in-person classes and counseling and stuff, but not, I mean, you don't have to do any of that stuff either. So, yeah.
Do you feel like, since, you know, you're already a therapist, you've already, you know, you've read the books, you've done all this stuff, that you don't necessarily need their assistance in those regards?
Oh, yeah. I know everything. So I'm smarter than you. No. Think of that. I don't know if you've seen Parks and Rec, when Ron Swanson's at like Menards or whatever, and they're like, oh, can I help you? And he's like, I know more than you. Does all that like woodworking and stuff. But anyway, yeah, no, I think part of it is, it's not because of my job that I know, it's just because we've done this so many times at this point that, probably earlier on, I was a lot more engaged in accepting those kinds of resources and learning about that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I'm always curious about stuff like that because, you have the burden of knowledge. I've done that in other aspects of my life too, where it's like I've done these things so many times that there's these little steps that I kind of skip over because, I know how to get to the end point so fast. So I'm not usually super accepting of assistance in those moments, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think like just in terms of therapy, I think I've been in that place in the past of like, I probably would benefit from some therapy over something and had to kind of talk myself through that of like, well, why would I go to see a therapist when I already know all the things they're going to say to me? I know all the things they're going to do, kind of like whatever, but it really is helpful. And I see a lot of therapists myself as clients of mine. So I don't know. I think it's a really great thing that even if you know all of the things, obviously, that there's always going to be stuff you don't know, or even sometimes it's good to just talk about it, talk about it with somebody else that's not you. So, yeah.
Something I've learned, actually it wasn't that long ago, I guess, is that people will think about things differently, or they'll like cover and go over stuff differently. So I've learned that my wife will just internalize things, and she'll go in her head and she'll have this little conversation and she can figure all these things out. And for me, it's like tumbleweeds inside my head. There's like nothing in there. And I figured out the only way I actually like sort stuff out and figure it out is if I verbally do it. Like I've tried journaling as techniques, and that helps a little bit, but there's something magical about me saying words out loud, even if I'm saying them to myself, where I don't know, like I can figure stuff out so much better that way. It's so strange.
I think everybody has their own way. It's like whatever works for you, Some people hate journaling. Something that I recommend sometimes to people, and I've done this many times, is I'll just like make a video of myself talking things out loud, or like a voice recording, because it's kind of like journaling, but I'm not like paying attention to, I don't know, punctuation and all that junk. Like I can do it while I'm driving, just getting my thoughts out of my brain out loud can be really helpful. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of research on you, not too much, because I still like a little surprise every now and then. But you have kind of an interesting background. So I see you went to school for criminal justice and sociology, and then eventually turned into a trauma counselor or therapist. And I'm just curious, what was the evolution of that? Because I see where you are now and where you started in. I have some childhood stuff with kind of family abuse sort of stuff like that. And the idea that you mired yourself down in this for so long is terrifying to me. And so I'm just curious how you navigated that whole ladder. Like, how did that come about?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. Since I was a young kid, probably, I wanted to be a counselor. Like my grandpa was a counselor, and so I was familiar with it. And so I was pretty set on that until I got to the point where I'm looking at colleges and realizing, oh, wait, like I need to go to school for how long? And I need to take out how many loans? And I need to do what now? Like, then I got a little bit freaked out by that. And so I decided at that time to change to doing criminal justice and sociology, because I figured, it's kind of similar. I could work with, I'd only have to go to school for 4 years, and I could work with people in that capacity that are, trying to rehabilitate their lives. My mom is a juvenile probation officer and loves her job. So I had that context of like, okay, she's kind of like a counselor. Like these kids come and see her, they check in with her, that kind of thing. So that was my thought process initially. And so I did my internship in undergrad at the juvenile detention center, which is basically jail for kids. And it was a really cool experience, but I, in my, like myself, in my soul, in my core, like I couldn't reckon with the fact that these kids, all of them obviously had done bad things to be in jail, but they all had so much trauma in their past, they just a variety of things, beyond the stuff that had landed them in there, obviously. I'm just like, well, why did they do those things? Why did they choose to do those things? Like, that's just how my brain works. I always am so curious about how people get from point A to point B. And, and to me, I'm like, well, if we're really going to help them change, they need to understand themselves how they got there, And so I'm like, I don't think I can do this kind of work from this end. Like, I just can't separate myself from the trauma part. And I say that too, it's not that they didn't talk about that at all, but it was very much, it wasn't a priority. It was like, let's look at what the crime was first, and then kind of along the way, we'll do a little bit of that. And I think too now, because I worked with, kids in the juvenile detention center many years after that, and they have made a lot of really positive changes in terms of how they approach things. And I think that is becoming a bigger thing in terms of the criminal justice system. But at that time, I was like, no, like, I just need to suck up the sticker shock and go do what I've actually been wanting to do my whole life. So then, I got my master's degree in clinical counseling. And then from there, I did an internship at an agency that worked with both victims as well as juvenile offenders of sexual abuse and their families. And so that kind of gave me both worlds, where I was working with the offenders, the kids that, had committed those crimes, as well as the victims. So I got both of those viewpoints. And then I also, after that, worked at an agency that was like a domestic violence shelter. And then they did counseling there for all ages of domestic violence and sexual abuse, emotional abuse, that kind of thing, human trafficking. And I was a counselor there for many years. And then I became the clinical director there. So that was a really neat experience too, in terms of getting a background on trauma, because I got to work with all ages. Before, I'd only really worked with kids, and that was giving me an opportunity to really see what trauma looks like at all different ages and stages. We would respond to crisis calls. So I'd see some like really like this just happened trauma. And then I'd also have clients that would come see me for therapy that were later in life and there to talk about things that had happened very earlier in their life. So they're way removed from the trauma, So I got to work with a lot of parents and siblings that were impacted by things that had happened to people in their family. So I just got like so many different viewpoints of everything around trauma, from, the offenders to the victims, to the families, to the right in the moment, to the way down the road, to all of it. So I was really lucky, I think, just the way that my path led me, that I got that kind of perspective on everything. And then being the clinical director, I got a lot of opportunities to do things like training and speaking and, even working at that point too with a lot of other therapists or, medical professionals or law enforcement that were dealing with like that secondary trauma, the vicarious trauma from the work that they did every day, of hearing those stories. So I kind of put that all in a big ball and opened my own practice. And that's kind of just been the foundation of what I do now.
Oh my gosh. I just try and for a second there, just kind of close my eyes and try to put myself in that position. And the feeling it gave me was like helplessness or powerlessness. Just, like hearing all these people and wanting to help. And then it's just one after another. How do you, I don't want to assume that that's how you felt, but if it is something akin to that, how do you deal with that? That's like, that would crush me literally into dust. I can't imagine somebody doing it, not even just for a week, but for years like you have.
Yeah. Well, I get asked that a lot, but you know what? Like, the reason that I did it and do it and continue to do it is because it works. Like, you get to see the other side of that too,
Mm.
you know, like people healing and people making real changes and seeing those breakthroughs. And I mean, that it's so amazing to see that. And I think too, having that perspective going into working with people is they're coming to me thinking, how can I ever heal? How can I ever? But like, I know, like I've seen it, like I have so much belief that they will get there. And, you know, the things that they are explaining to me that they've experienced or are experiencing, it's like, you know, yeah, like I know exactly how that is because I've sat with lots of other people that have felt that exact same way. And I've also seen those people go from feeling that way to not feeling that way anymore. So like, I know that you will get there too, because I've seen it, you know, and I think being able to bring that into the work that I do with other people, that I like wholeheartedly believe that anybody can heal because I've seen it. And so, you know, I think if they don't believe it for themselves or they can't fathom what that could possibly look like, it doesn't really matter because like, I know that we'll get there, you know? So yeah, I think that's definitely, I think it's a really, I don't have to like work at having that mindset because it's just been my experience pretty consistently.
So somebody comes in and they feel like I'll never get to the other side of this, and they don't believe in themselves being able to do it. Do they put their belief in you? Like, just you're telling me these things. All right, I'm going to believe in you, even if I don't believe myself, and just try and like, how do you convince somebody to keep coming back?
Well, I think, you know, for a part of them, maybe a quiet part of them or a smaller part of them does believe that if they're sitting in front of me, right? Like, no one's like, why even be here if they truly don't think it's possible at all, right? So I think when I worked more sometimes with like court ordered stuff, that was a little more challenging for sure, because sometimes people were like, no, you have to be there. And, you know, maybe they had zero desire or belief in that or whatever. But yes, I think that there's always, I think just human nature, there's a part of us that even if we don't believe it, we want it to be true. You know, and obviously there's people like me that exist in this field and do this kind of work for a reason. So maybe it works for somebody, like, I'll give it a shot. And in terms of getting them to come back, you know, typically I try to, it's not really something I run into much, to be honest, but I would say more so when I worked in the public or worked with like more court ordered clients, that kind of thing. Or like sometimes like a kid or a teen whose parent is like, you need to do counseling. And they're like, I don't really want to, but they're being made to be there. Right. I always just tell them, give me like 3 sessions. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. It's totally fine, because my goal at the end of the day is never to be like this one and only savior that comes in and like turns their life around for them. I just want them to have a good experience, you know? And so if all we do in 3 sessions is, I don't know, kind of get to know each other and sort of talk about things a little bit and they're just not ready, that's fine. People aren't always ready to talk about that stuff, or maybe they don't have the safety in their life or the resources to really do that kind of work. But if they have a good experience, they're more likely to down the road, when they are ready, go back and try it again, you know? So that's my only goal, is that it's, even if it's just 1 session, that it's a positive experience, and that, you know, unfortunately there are many people that have had bad experiences with therapy that they're like, I'm never doing that again, or I refuse to, like, that's, you know, and they just shut their mind off to it. And that's too bad, because, you know, obviously there's a lot of different therapists. There's a lot of different types of modalities and therapy approaches and stuff. But, you know, I get that. That bad experiences in therapy can be traumatizing in and of themselves. So I don't want to ever add to the problem. That's my goal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a noble goal. Just, what is it like? Leave everything a little bit better than you found it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
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 So something you said really spoke to the autistic side of my brain. You're talking about, you've talked to a lot of people, and to me, that's reps, that's practice, that's running scenarios, that's, scientific method, which is very pleasing to my brain. And so I was thinking about it because you mentioned that there are a lot of different therapists, right? Everybody's different. I'm not here to say somebody's better than anybody else, but there's obviously people that are very successful for a reason, right? There's something special about what they do. And I'm curious is how much of what you're taught is science versus sort of art, like trial and error, I'm assuming has something to do with like how you perform your operations, right? You're talking to 100 people, you start hearing patterns, and then you start adapting to that, right?
No.
Do you kind of build that? Is that more or less what they try and teach you, is to constantly be learning?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like even like I have shifted so much over the years that I've been doing this, just in the things that I don't know, see patterns in, and I'm curious, like, what is that thing that I'm noticing? And I want to research it, and I want to learn more about it. And, some things really stick and other things don't. And it's kind of, in terms of like the science side of things, I'm always, because I'm such a curious person, like I want to know, well, like, why does that thing work? Like, what is going on in the body and the brain and the whatever that, that is the response that somebody gives in that situation. So I can tend to be, I'll pick up on a pattern and then I want to know why. And then I figure it out for myself. And then I use that to then explain to other people, like, oh, this is why this thing happens, because in your brain, this is what's going on in that scenario. And like, here's like the prefrontal cortex and here's your amygdala. And I'm like, and sometimes I'm like, and I can also shut up if this means nothing to you. So, but I don't know. I just kind of like meeting people where they're at with that. I'm not going to bore everybody with my brain science, but to go beyond the like, I think therapy works because I see the healing. Yes, absolutely. And also I understand and know a lot of the science behind why people end up stuck, or why certain memories feel really blurry and other ones feel really clear, like all of those things. Like I like to know, like, and understand that there is science behind it and what people experience. And it's not just a like, oh, I'm a weak person or I'm flawed or there's something wrong with me because blah, 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 blah. But like, no, there might actually be something physiologically happening that is making it very difficult for you to, I don't know, like be in social situations or something, right? To help people understand that other perspective.
Oh, I love that so much more than you know, or probably I'm capable of articulating. I love the science-based approach. I don't know about where you are in Illinois, but here in Texas, so much of the therapy is like faith-based or religion-based. And so some of it is you're this way because of magic. You do that thing because of demons. And it's, to me, that's, I don't want to yuck on anybody's yum, but that doesn't jive with my brain. But somebody saying, here's empirical information, here's data, here's tested methods that we've done that show these improvements. That means so much more to me than there's a demon in you, right? So I love people taking like a logical, reality-based things I can see and feel in front of me approach. So I appreciate that so much, because some of those other approaches to me say, well, you're born with this sin and you're bad because of this. It's not that, right? It's like so much of it is actually based on, like you said, like, I mean, I've done some reading. There's this book, Far From the Tree, that says like your proclivities, the things you like, you don't like. They're saying like they believe somewhere around 50% of that is purely genetic. You may not like mustard because of your DNA, right? Which is crazy wacky. And so if you could explain why you have certain tics or things that happen, because of the way you're made, I would much rather hear that and somebody who believes in that kind of line of thinking than otherwise.
Right. And that's why I always encourage anybody who has maybe had a bad experience with therapy or feels like therapy isn't for them. There are so many approaches to therapy and so many personalities and types of therapy and stuff that, like some people are looking for, like they don't want to hear science. They want to hear that it's the magical spaghetti monster in the sky or whatever, there are some people that don't want that. And there's a therapist for that person, and there's a therapist for somebody who wants something different. So yeah, I think that it's not like you can't just like put therapy in a box that it's this one way, that there is going to be somebody out there for you if you do the work to find that person. And also, like, if I always tell people, if you are working with a therapist or a doctor or a dentist or whoever that you're just like, you don't vibe with or whatever, you don't have to stay with that person, like it's okay. And we get it as therapists too, like it's somebody that you're going to be spending possibly an hour a week or every other week or whatever with, talking about the most vulnerable things in your life. Like, don't you think you should like at least somewhat vibe with the person, right? I do think that relationship piece is important for sure.
Yeah. So then I when I'm talking to people and they've never done therapy before and they're getting ready to kind of venture in there, I say, get ready to have a couple of false starts. You're probably going to have to, it's, what do they say? Yeah. Anything worth doing is worth being bad at, right? So don't expect to hit a home run when you first step up to the plate, right? You might have to try. Well, and if whatever it is you're trying to work on is worth it, then, you are worth it. Put in a little bit of extra time.
Yeah, for sure.
Something you said is that, you figure out this brain science, you've determined this thing, and then you share with others. And I think what people listening may not be aware of is that you're not just talking about sharing with your clients. You share with tons of people on social media. I mean, ultimately, I think that's how I found you. The crazy Instagram algorithm. Or no, maybe you were on Laughing Squid. I think you had a little feature on there that linked to something.
What's Laughing Squid? I don't know. Maybe.
It's one of those aggregator websites. It's just your video happened to pop up on there. And right? It's a crazy world we live in, Lauren. I think you know that. It's full of randomness and I love it. Yeah,
the wild, wild west out in social media world too, for sure.
Yeah, but you are definitely hitting huge numbers, and it's for a reason, because you are like freely sharing of yourself, all these things that you learn. To me, that is amazing. I'm a person who shares like all this amassed knowledge. I don't think it's for me to like hide and lock away. And you're trying to make the world a better place. Why is that important for you to share all that stuff like that?
I think that kind of, I don't know. I think that sometimes the beauty of social media is that people can see something, whether it's a therapist talking about a, science behind something, or just a person telling their own personal story or whatever. And they're like, oh my gosh, I relate to that. Or wait a second, that describes me, and I think that can be so much beauty in that wasn't available to us, however many years ago before social media. I don't even know. I almost said like 5 years ago, but that doesn't feel right either. So whatever it was. But I mean, the amount of times people have, responded to certain things that I've posted about like, oh my gosh, like that's not just me, or like, oh my goodness, like the way that you described that, I had no idea anybody else felt that way, or, whatever the case may be, that I'm like, you know what, like if there's one of those people, like then it's worth it, right? Because I think that's the thing is, a lot of times humans aren't just walking around in the world in their day-to-day lives talking about like some really deep, vulnerable hurt or pain that they've experienced. And so there isn't always those opportunities in I put in quotes, the real world to relate to people in that way, or to find those connections, or to normalize certain things, or not feel so alone. Or usually in the quote real world, when you do, it comes after, a long period of time, or all of these different things. So it is kind of this way that there can be this information kind of readily available out there, and people can connect and, maybe for the first time feel like, oh, wait, maybe this is something that I don't have to feel this way. Or maybe the fact that I feel XYZ isn't my fault, but this is just actually what happens in somebody's brain or whatever. Like there's so much cool stuff that can happen with that I think that obviously social media can be toxic and there's downsides, but there's also a lot of good stuff too. So.
Yeah. It seems like we only hear about the bad. I mean, there's plenty of bad, but there's also, definitely good. So talking about connecting with something, I know it's so funny. My brain is stupid. But I will hear the same piece of information presented to me for years. And then somebody will come along and present it in just the way where that puzzle piece snaps in my brain. And it definitely works. And that's what's made me a big proponent of, if you learn something or something, share it. Right? I mean, you are sharing it in spades, but for all the little people out there that think, well, everybody already knows this, you'd be surprised that sometimes your words are just the right words that snap that puzzle piece in. And it's so important for other people to hear that. And I'm also curious, have you ever seen anything out there that just kind of connected with you in that way?
Oh, I'm sure I have. Yeah. I think a lot of times, I don't know, a lot of the things that I've ended up doing more research on have been from, really a lot of times in sessions with clients, somebody's describing something. And then in the next session, somebody else is describing something very similar. And then, next week, the same thing. So I'm making these patterns of like, wait, like, no, there's something here. This is a thing. This is a common thing. Like, I'm like, I want to get you all in a room so you can tell this to each other. So then instead of me telling you you're not alone, you're all like realizing you're not alone, so I get it a lot in that sense where I'm like, okay, there's something here. I want to do research on it, or I want to put something out on social media about it, because if these 5 people this week in my office all experience the same thing, then surely there's got to be some people out there on social media that would experience that too. So a lot of my stuff really does come from that type of thing, and I think same thing, like if you're scrolling through TikTok or Reels or whatever online, you can get that same effect of like, oh my gosh, I just saw 4 videos today where they were all talking about this same thing, that I experience, and people make their own connections in that way too. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it can be really validating for a lot of people.
All right. So you're in a session, you hear somebody say something and you kind of make note of it, mental note. And then the next session you hear somebody and it sounds very similar. And then once you hear the third, what's the feeling you get when like, oh my gosh, like there's this new thread, I'm finding this thread, let me research. Like, does that make you excited? Like, do you get like super jazzed up about that?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I should write a novel on this. And it usually ends up as like one Instagram post and then that's that. But no, but yeah, it is. It's exciting because it's just, a lot of times people are sharing something that they're feeling stuck or alone in. And so for me to have that perspective, like, oh, no, like if a lot of people are alone in that exact same feeling, then obviously you're not that alone. We're just not talking about it. Or like this information isn't readily available to where people think that they're alone in this. Like there needs to be more out there about this thing, like whatever the thing is. I mean, there's so many examples and blogs I've written and stuff about that kind of thing that, yeah, definitely.
So you've mentioned, I would say more than any other thing, like when we're referencing therapy here, about not being alone. Is that, would you say that is like one of the number one things that people want / need to hear when they're going through these processes? Like, I guess, is that something maybe that's more specific to trauma?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to say because I am been so trauma specific and focused for a long time that I guess I can't speak for other things. But, I think that whenever anything happens that is distressing, what goes along with that, because we're humans, and here, I'll give you you want my brain talk? I'll give you a little bit of brain talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Give it to me. I'm ready.
Okay.
Let me get my popcorn.
Right. But like when something distressing happens, I'll just use an example. Let's say there's a tornado hits your house, right? So obviously that would be distressing. You're going to, in that moment, feel overwhelmed, unsafe, like it's a lot. It's scary. You're not in your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that you think with and rationalize with. You don't need that in that moment, right? You're in your brainstem, the instincts, that's the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like react, be safe, find safety, try to find, comfort. Like that's what's happening in that moment, right? And then after that, when we come out of that instinctual part of our hindbrain, there's the hippocampus, that's where our memories are stored. So we're thinking about those memories. There's the amygdala where we have our emotions about it. Like that was scary. That was terrifying. I'm sad, all of those things. We get to actually access that stuff when we are safe. If you're in that immediate moment, you're not able to access that stuff. And then later on down the road, when people have those like trauma responses where, maybe the house has been rebuilt, everything's fine, things are back to normal, but there's still a lot of distress coming up anytime they think about that, or anytime there's a storm, or anytime they hear a siren that reminds them of the tornado siren, they get back into those parts of their brain that they had back when the tornado hit their house. That's where they're getting stuck. And that's when we are able to be more in our prefrontal cortex, that thinking logical side of the brain. And that's when people think like, okay, well, how can I prepare? How can I avoid this? What should I have done differently? Maybe if I would have, I don't know, gone into the basement sooner, then I wouldn't remember whatever that memory is that has me so traumatized. Or I wish that I had, like I have no control. I'm helpless. I can't ever be safe. We get these things like stuck in our thinking part of our brain that keeps us in this like panicky, anxious, depressed, whatever it is mode. And those things in our front part of our brain, those are the cognitions that we're saying about ourselves of like, I can't ever be safe. Like I have no control. I could have avoided it. I should have done something different. Like these are these like beliefs that come from this terrible thing that happened. And that's where people often get stuck. And so, yeah, I think that number one, understanding that you're not alone in that. It's not because you didn't do something right. It's not actually because you are the sole person on this earth that has no control and are unsafe. Like it's nothing about them, but rather everybody feels that because of what's happening in our brains and in our bodies during that event. And like, this is how the brain works. This is what it's doing. This is why we have those thoughts. It's an attempt to keep us safe. It's an attempt to gain control so that we don't end up in that situation in the future. But actually, we don't have any control over that. And so, and so you asked about like hearing you're not alone. Yeah. Like to understand that you're not this like helpless person, this flawed person, this broken person, this whatever person that you're just stuck there. But no, like this is like the impact of the really terrible thing that happened. And so to understand that and understand that anybody in that situation would feel something similar, and like, this is what you do with it. Here's how we get through it. That's where a lot of healing can come from.
And something that struck me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you make it sound like trauma is a natural response. Your body is doing this thing, right? So it's normal. I mean, everybody experiences it differently, right? And some people in those same situations may not even have some kind of traumatic experience, but it is normal evolutionary trait, right? It was supposed to help us detect patterns and then avoid those dangerous patterns in the future. And I guess, what are we, like danger sensing machines? And there's not as much danger around us these days. So you probably don't need to have that response every time you go get a cup of coffee.
Well, I think too, sometimes, like, for instance, like, people will come to therapy because they're struggling with, let's say, anxiety, we'll use the same tornado thing. Like, if that person who had that experienced that tornado is now dealing with all this anxiety all the time, and they're like, I need to go to therapy. I need to figure out this anxiety. It's getting in the way of all these things in my life. It's like they've labeled anxiety the problem. That's the thing that's wrong with them, that they have anxiety, right? But also that anxiety is there because of the terrible thing that happened and is trying super hard to keep them safe, keep them aware, keep them prepared. It's doing it thinks it's doing a really important function in their lives to help avoid feeling that terrible way that they felt, And so when people are like, I can't just get over it, it's like, well, yeah, because it thinks it's serving a really important process. And if you don't like understand that or get curious about that and have some compassion for the fact that it exists, like, then it's going to, continue, I think sometimes even to ramp up, because, if something is like, its sole purpose is to help you and keep you safe, and you're like, no, I'm going to ignore you. I'm not going to look at you. I don't like you. You're bad. But they're like, I just want to keep you safe. Like, they're going to get louder and they're going to get louder and they're going to be like, no, like, look at me. I'm trying to keep you safe. Right. So sometimes ignoring it or trying to like just move beyond it actually makes it worse, So yeah, I could go I won't go all in those weeds, but it's like those things actually, a lot of it is just looking at things completely differently than I think how any human without that context or understanding would just assume, this is the problem, that's the problem, whatever the case may be, where a lot of times what people say is the problem is actually, it was there for a reason, or is there for a reason. It's serving some sort of purpose. Even like the really, like an addiction, right? Like, I think, why do people form addictions? Well, what was happening at some point in their life that they got something out of that there was some sort of positive response, or they get something from whatever it is. And so it plays a role. And then to just get rid of that response, that coping thing, whatever that, whether it's like that numbing out or that comfort or that whatever, to just try and like white knuckle it and be like, well, I'm never going to numb out again because that's bad. But then when that is the way that you survived, when that is the way that the only way that you know how to get through things, the only way or the easiest way, the most accessible way to have help when you need it, to just get rid of it. Like, of course it's hard to get over an addiction if that's the way that you're looking at it, right? It's more so like, okay, I understand now that thing that used to help me, or that does actually help me in some ways, actually harms me in other ways too. And there's probably things that I could find that give me that same response that actually help me feel less overwhelmed and feel closer to that like numb feeling that I really like, that actually won't have those harmful effects. And so like walking towards that is a much more sustainable way to heal from those things than to just be like, no, that thing is bad, I'm just gonna white knuckle it. And then what when things get hard, right?
Yeah. I heard somebody say one time that the brain doesn't, like the coping mechanisms we develop, it doesn't make the one that's the healthiest for us. It does the one that's the quickest and simplest for it to accomplish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
it's like,
sure.
let me put some duct tape on this real fast and then keep going. It's got other stuff to do.
Yeah.
So it's like,
I
it's
always
our
joke
job
with people,
to undo that, right?
I know. People beat themselves up over all the ways they cope. And I'm like, okay, like So you didn't, experience that really awful thing and like go run to the closest yoga studio and do some stretches? Like, of course not. Like, what? Of course you didn't. Like, you're a human at the end of the day. Like, that's just like not how humans function, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
people usually laugh at that, but it's true. Like,
It's so funny. I think people, to me, like I look at us, we're these big chemical machines, right? We run on all this stuff. Like the way you think and feel can literally be changed by the food you eat, right? It can release different chemicals in your body. And it, as a machine does, it just tries to repair itself quickly, right? So, you ascribe this mysticism to it sometimes, but really the body is just trying to survive. It's trying to do whatever it can as quick as possible. I had a question that also popped into my head through all of this, and like the idea of you're very passionate about all this stuff. I love talking to anybody. If somebody is passionate about making wind chimes, I want to talk to them. Like I genuinely love talking to people that really care about what they do. But being in this stuff for so long and dealing with people who've been through so much trauma and all that stuff, it sounds like you're making amazing strides and all that. And sharing all of it, it was just tremendous. That blows me away. I love the people that do that openly. They don't put it behind some gate. You're just giving of yourself. The environment you're working in, how do you keep that from coloring your perception of the rest of the world? And I have a cousin that I think she's still a cop. Maybe she's not anymore. It's been a little while, but she used to work in a group that just dealt with like sexual assault to children and stuff like that. And she said she looks at every guy as like a potential perp now, it entirely changed the way she looks at the world. And I always wondered, like, people in different professions, does that happen to them? If it does happen to them, how do you deal with that? Like, how have you, like, is that a thing for you or no?
I think, I feel like it's at times it can be, and I usually attribute that to burnout. I need a break. I need a vacation, right? I do think that I'm maybe lucky in the fact that I have a perspective of having worked with the perps and the victims that I feel like I can, I don't know if empathize is the right word necessarily, but I understand all sides of the spectrum, and that it, obviously there are some really black and white terrible things, but, I think that for the most part, I don't think it's helpful to see the world under that lens, I really truly believe that anybody, regardless of what their experience or story is, has the ability to heal and change and see things differently. Looking at everybody that, like, everybody's a perp, okay, but I'm like, but then, like, why are they a perp? And, like, what is the roots of that? And what's the trauma that, like, and, like, how can they heal from that? That's, like, where my brain goes, like, a layer deeper. But yeah, I think it's sometimes you can get burnt out, and it's like it's like everybody that you saw that week seemed to be in high level crisis, and, like, what's the point kind of a feeling. And that's just ebbs and flows, but it just, I think it's really important to, I don't know. I think people can burn themselves out if they're not being intentional about it, not taking breaks, not, if they're setting up their schedule for the week with just back to back to back to back to back to back to back stuff or something. Like, that's not healthy. People really need to, like, if you're going to do this type of work, it's super important to take care of your own self. It's kind of that, like, analogy of on the airplane, like, put your oxygen mask on first so you can help other people. I mean, there's no, like, you just can't do it any other way.
Something you said there triggered a little memory of mine. There's one of my absolute favorite podcasts. I'm not sure if you're a podcast person, other than being on them. It's one called Ear Hustle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So it's recorded by the prisoners in San Quentin, by the prisoners, right? So prior to listening to this, I used to have kind of this idea that like criminals, it's like they were this group of people, right? And I learned that through this podcast, they don't even call themselves criminals. They call themselves incarcerated persons. And I think that's important because it humanizes them. And I've learned that whenever you can put these people into a group, you start stripping away their humanity, right? They just become this other criminals, immigrants, whatever large group of people you want to, ascribe something to. You start stripping away that humanity, and you forget that they're people with wants and needs and, feelings just like you. And something it taught me is I think you alluded to it earlier, is that a lot of these guys that they're talking to have some of the most horrific childhoods I've ever heard of. And then they become these people that do these awful acts. But what did you expect? You took this raw material and you shaped it into a weapon, and then when it killed somebody, why are you acting surprised by it, right? So it helped me understand a little bit better and maybe feel bad for some of these folks, right? Obviously, you can't let them just run loose in society. That's dangerous, right? You have to protect everybody else from them. But I think it gave me the ability to understand and at least feel bad, right? That it's a lot of this wasn't like a conscious choice for a lot of these people. Right. It was the only way they knew to survive. And also, and I can't remember who it's attributed to, but imagine being judged by the worst thing you've ever done for the rest of your life. And all these people, sometimes it was a split-second bad decision, right? That happened to them in there at 16 or 17, which, oh my gosh, it's like your prefrontal cortex is still Play-Doh at that point. Like all of those parts of your brain are still forming. And I love the idea of, I think you're saying similar things, right? Like that sometimes it's better to just understand than to judge, maybe.
Right. Yeah. I need to figure out who said this quote, because I never give them credit, but I'm always saying it, like, there isn't a person you wouldn't love if you knew their story. And I really believe that's true. Because it's like, if you really get to know somebody at their core, it's like you can understand them more. You can, and maybe not agree and maybe not relate, but if you give somebody the opportunity to share with you, I would say, especially, man, when I was working with my juvenile sex offenders, some of them really drove me nuts. They made me frustrated and pushed my buttons intentionally and, all these things, these juvenile boys. But I also could understand why they were doing what they were doing. That was their attempt to gain some control. And, there was a lot of shame there and projecting and all these things that I'm like, yeah, of course you're doing that. The most frustrating ones that I've had to deal with, I'm like, okay, yeah, it makes sense. I don't like it, but and that's how they can change too, of them understanding why they're doing what they're doing. And that also, it's not helpful and it's causing more problems and stuff like that. But yeah, I think some of my most difficult to quote love clients have been some of my most memorable ones that I've ever worked with, for sure.
That's cool. Well, I could keep asking you questions and keep talking to you, but I try and be very respectful of folks' time. I know you're an extremely busy person. You've got 15, 16 more Instagram posts to make today to hit your quota. You are very prolific. No, I totally see you're super busy. But right here at the end, I like to ask people if there's something you would promote, or if you got something coming up, or hopefully you're compiling a very fascinating book about all the brain discoveries you've made, and you want to tell me about it. How would you have people find you or interact with you out there on the internet?
Yeah, I do have some things that I'm working on that I haven't released or made public yet, but if people follow me, I'm most active on Instagram probably, and that's at Steadfast Counseling, all one word. And then my website as well, steadfastcounseling.com, has a link to all my social media. There's my blog is in there. I also am like dabbling in TikTok, but I don't know. There's just so many to keep track of, I feel like. But yeah, I'm on TikTok too, if that's people's preferred thing. But, when I post stuff, it'll all be on there and advertised on there. So that's probably the best way to follow me.
All right, rock and roll. Well, Lauren.
Yeah.
Thank you for the gift of your time. And I'm going to hit stop really quick on all this stuff.